The Unpaid Ledger, Episode 9, Consecrated. Chapter 1, Restless. Marcus didn't call. He texted. 3 words, no punctuation. Come see me. The screen glowed in the dark of my apartment, those 3 words sitting there like a lit fuse. Marcus Bell used semicolons in text messages. He capitalized. He signed off with his initials. 3 words with no punctuation from Marcus was the equivalent of a flare gun. I showed Eddie the screen. He read it and said nothing, which was its own kind of alarm. Second Chances was locked when I got there, not the front door. Marcus kept that open until 9, some old habit about hospitality he'd never explain. The back room, the one with the reinforced shelving and the containment supplies and the particular hum that came from objects holding things they didn't want to hold. That door was closed, and through it I could hear Marcus moving, carefully, around something fragile. I knocked, 2 short raps against the reinforced door, and waited. "It's open," Marcus called, though his voice carried none of its usual warmth. He was standing at the workbench with the silver vessel in front of him, not holding it, not working on it, just watching it. The vessel looked the same. Ornate silver box, symbols etched deep. Marcus's handiwork from decades of practice. But the cloth he usually kept it wrapped in was folded neatly to one side, and there were 3 fresh candles burning in a triangle pattern around the workbench. I'd seen Marcus use candles exactly once before, and that was the night the crystal started singing. "How long?" I said, pulling up a stool without sitting in it. "Sit down, young man." His tone left no room for argument. He pulled off his reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. His vest was buttoned wrong. 2nd button in the first hole, 3rd button in the second. Marcus Bell had been dressing himself for 70+ years and had never buttoned a vest wrong in his life. "The contents are moving," he said. "Not escaping. Not yet. But the entity material inside has been pressing against the binding for the past 3 nights. Rhythmically, like breathing." "Entity material doesn't breathe," I said, keeping my voice level. "No, it doesn't." He met my eyes, and I saw something I'd never seen in them before. And yet, the silver vessel sat on the workbench between us. I couldn't hear anything from it. Couldn't feel anything. Not from this distance. But Marcus had spent 50 years working with containment, and if he said the thing inside was moving, then the thing inside was moving. 3 nights, I said. "You waited 3 nights. I wanted to be certain it wasn't thermal fluctuation or my own anxiety." He straightened, rebuttoned his vest correctly without looking down. Old hands, steady, doing the work even while the rest of him was off balance. "It's not thermal fluctuation." Eddie drifted to the far side of the room, away from the vessel. He'd kept his distance from it since the university, since we'd split the entity and stuffed half of it into that box. I'd never asked him about it. Didn't need to. The thing inside was made from 5 years of my cost that had piled up in the gray space where Eddie lived. Whatever it was to me, it was something worse to him. "Options," I said, leaning forward with my hands on my knees. "Limited." Marcus sat down slowly, choosing his words. "The vessel will hold. Weeks, certainly. Perhaps months. But the material inside is becoming organized, coherent. It was diffuse when we captured it. Scattered energy from multiple cost events over multiple years. Now it's condensing, finding a shape. Like last time," I said, though I didn't want to say it out loud. "Slower than last time. The vessel constrains it, but the trajectory is the same." I thought about the entity in the university basement, the thing that had hunted me by name, the thing that was made from everything I'd been pushing into the gray space for 5 years without knowing it. Half of that was anchored to a building foundation. The other half was 6 feet away from me, learning how to breathe. "What do you need?" I said, and I meant it as simply as I said it. Marcus had been waiting for that question. His shoulders settled. He'd been braced for an argument that wasn't coming. "I've been thinking about dispersal," he said. "Not into a person, not into open air, something else." He paused, pulled a folded map from under the workbench. Actual paper, creased and marked in pencil. "Old Ashford. North End." Elmwood Cemetery. You know it? Driven past it, I said, watching him smooth the creases from the map. It's been there since 1887. Consecrated ground. Over 100 years of burials, grief, guilt, the weight that people carry to gravesides and leave behind. He smoothed the map flat. That soil has been absorbing costs naturally for longer than either of us has been alive. No placements, no adjustments. Just the ambient weight of human loss settling into the earth over generations. Eddie spoke from the far wall. You want to feed entity material to a cemetery? Marcus looked at him evenly. I want to disperse concentrated entity material into ground that's already saturated with natural ledger activity. The theory being that soil which has accepted a century of passive cost accumulation might absorb active material without civilian risk. Theory, Eddie said, his tone flat enough to sand wood with. Theory, Marcus agreed, folding his hands on the workbench. I'd prefer certainty, but that's been in short supply lately. I looked at the map. Elmwood was north of the warehouse district, old neighborhood, the kind of place where the graves were close together and the stones were worn smooth and nobody visited anymore, except on holidays. Has this been done before? I asked, tracing the pencil marks with my finger. Not to my knowledge, but consecrated ground dispersal was discussed in certain circles when I was young. The older practitioners mentioned it the same way they mentioned a lot of things, something that worked in the past and was too dangerous to try in the present. He folded his glasses, set them on the map. I've been in those circles for 50 years, Samuel. This is the best option I have. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Derek, keeping it short. Need you tonight. Elmwood Cemetery. Midnight. Bring the usual. Derek's reply came in 4 seconds. Just the letter K. I already spoke with Derek, Marcus said, watching me pocket the phone. I know. I held up my phone. 4-second response time. He was waiting for my text. Marcus almost smiled. The expression flickered and died before it reached his eyes. Bring him, Marcus said. I'll need your hands for the dispersal. The push has to come from you. Entity material recognizes its source. And I want someone watching our backs who knows what a bureau surveillance team looks like. You think we'll be watched? I said, watching him wrap the cloth tight. Marcus picked up the silver vessel, held it like something precious and dangerous, which it was, wrapped it in the cloth with the same precise folds he'd used for 50 years. I think, he said, that we've been watched for longer than we'd like to believe. Chapter 2. Elmwood. The cemetery gate was iron and old enough that the rust had its own rust. Derek was already there when we pulled up, leaning against the hood of his truck with his arms crossed and his eyes on the road behind us. He'd parked facing out. Old habit. Always leave yourself an exit. Midnight in Ashford's North End was quiet. Not peaceful. Empty. Streetlights every third pole, half of them dead. Row houses with dark windows. A liquor store on the corner that had closed for the night. Steel shutters down, neon off. Elmwood sat behind the iron gate like it had been waiting. Not large, maybe 3 acres. The headstones started close together near the entrance and spread out as the ground rose toward the back. Newer stones near the front, older ones further in, leaning at angles, names worn to shadows. Derek looked at the silver vessel under Marcus's arm, looked at the cemetery, back at the vessel. Walk me through it, he said, his arms still crossed against the cold. Marcus did. Short version. Dispersal into saturated ground. Controlled release. Sam pushes. Marcus guides the rate. Derek watches. Watches for what? Derek's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign he gave. Anything, Marcus said. The Bureau knows this vessel exists. They saw it at the university. If Rhodes reported up the chain, and he did, then Leland's network knows exactly what we're carrying and approximately how long it holds. Derek processed that quietly. His jaw worked once. Then he nodded and pulled something from his jacket, a compact pair of binoculars, military grade, the kind with night vision that you didn't get at sporting goods stores. Perimeter's clear right now, he said. I've been here 40 minutes. 2 cars passed. Neither slowed. We went in through the gate. It wasn't locked, just a latch. corroded grain that squealed when Marcus lifted it. The sound carried in the empty street. Nobody came to investigate. Nobody was around to care. Derek was through first. He stopped 3 steps in, crouched, and picked something up off the ground near the gatepost. A cigarette butt. He rolled it between his fingers, brought it to his nose. Recent, he said, holding it up between 2 fingers. Hours, not days. Could be anyone, I said. Kids. A groundskeeper. Derek looked at the gate latch, the rust we'd just broken through to open it. Then he looked at the cigarette butt again and put it in his pocket without saying anything else. The ground changed underfoot almost immediately. City concrete to packed earth to something softer, worked over by a century of digging and settling and digging again. Grass thin and patchy in February. Frost on the older stones catching what light there was. I felt it before we were 20 feet in, a shift in the air that had nothing to do with temperature. It wasn't a cost, more like standing at the edge of a lake and feeling the humidity change. The ledger was thicker here, denser. Present the way gravity is present. 10,000 goodbyes soaked into the earth over 137 years. You feel that? I said, slowing my pace without meaning to. Marcus was already nodding. The saturation. Yes, it's been building since before either of us was born. He adjusted the vessel under his arm. This is why I chose this place. The ground isn't just holding costs. It's become part of how they settle. A natural sink. We walked deeper, past the newer section where the stones were polished granite and the plots had artificial flowers in little metal vases, into the middle ground, 1950s, 1940s, some earlier. Names I didn't recognize. Dates that meant nothing to me and everything to someone, once. Eddie hadn't spoken since we left the car. He was drifting beside me, which was normal. But his attention wasn't on the conversation. It wasn't on the vessel or Marcus or the perimeter Derek was watching. He was looking at the older section, the back of the cemetery where the ground rose slightly and the stones were small and close together, and some of them had sunk halfway into the earth. I filed it away and kept walking, though I didn't like the look on his face. Marcus stopped at a clearing between sections. Newer graves to our left, the oldest stones uphill to our right. A flat patch of ground, maybe 10 feet across, where nothing had been buried. Neutral territory between generations. Here, he said, lowering himself to one knee beside the vessel. He set the vessel down on the frost-hardened earth, knelt beside it, started unwrapping the cloth with the same precision he did everything. Each fold deliberate, each layer peeled back like it mattered. Because it did. The silver box sat exposed in the thin moonlight. The symbols on its surface caught the light in ways that had nothing to do with reflection. Sam? Marcus looked up. When I open the binding, the material will release slowly. It should be drawn toward you. It always is. Your job is to take it and push it down, into the ground, not into yourself, into the earth. Let the soil take it. And if the soil doesn't want it? I asked, watching the symbols shift in the moonlight. Then we'll know very quickly, he said, his eyes steady on the silver box between us. Derek settled into position 30 yards downhill, between us and the gate. Binoculars up, watching the street, the road, the dark windows of the houses beyond the fence, doing his job. I knelt across from Marcus, the silver vessel between us, the cemetery around us, the dead below us, and whatever they'd left behind. Ready? Marcus said, his fingers resting on the edge of the lid. No, but that hadn't stopped me yet. I pressed my palms flat against the frozen earth. Open it, I said, and braced myself for whatever came next. Chapter 3. The Push. Marcus spoke 3 words in a language I didn't recognize. The same language he'd used on the crystal. Old, dense syllables that seemed to weigh more than English. The silver vessel's symbols flared once, dim blue, and the lid released with a sound like a long exhale. The entity material rose from the box like smoke that didn't dissipate. Dark. Slow. It hung in the air between us, formless but oriented. I could feel it turning toward me, finding me. Now, Sam. Slowly. Marcus held his hands steady on either side of the vessel, guiding the release. I put my hands on the ground, palms flat against cold earth, fingers spread, frost melting under my skin. And I pushed. Pushing cost between people was a bridge, a redirect. This was different. I was trying to feed something into the earth, and the earth had its own opinion about what it would accept. For a moment, nothing. The entity material hung in the air, my palms pressed into dirt that didn't give. Then the ground opened up. Nothing moved, nothing cracked. But the ledger layer beneath the surface responded, slowly, reluctantly at first. Then, with a pull of its own, the entity material began to sink. Through me, through my hands, into the soil. Slow, heavier than any cost I'd moved before. Each strand of it carried texture, not memories, not information, just the residue of years. My years. 5 years of costs that had accumulated in the gray space and compressed into something that tried to kill me. Steady, Marcus said. His hands were on the vessel, monitoring. The rate is good. Don't force it. I wasn't forcing anything. The ground was doing the work. 130 years of natural absorption had built something into this soil. A pull, steady and deep, that took what I offered without pushing back. A third of the way through, my arms ached. Not the neural degradation from the crystal. This was different. Muscular. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for too long, and my body was remembering what it cost. Then something pushed back, hard and sudden, like hitting a wall underwater. A knot of entity material, denser than the rest, hit a layer in the soil that didn't want it. For half a second, the flow reversed. I felt it surge up through my palms, and with it came a flash. Not a memory, a sensation. Hunger. The entity in the university basement, the thing that had known my name, reaching through the material it was made from. Still in there, diluted, but not gone. My hands locked against the ground. I shoved it down. Hard. The soil took it, reluctantly, and the flow resumed. Marcus's eyes were on me, sharp and searching. Sam? I'm fine. My voice was steady. My heart wasn't. I kept my palms pressed to the earth and breathed halfway through. The weight in my arms had settled into a deep, constant ache. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Marcus saw the movement and his eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. The dispersal was too delicate to break for a text. The entity material thinned. What had been a dark mass was becoming threads, strands, dissolving into the earth. The ground incorporating it into the same deep substrate that held a century of grief and guilt. 2/3 done now. The dark mass above the vessel was almost translucent. Marcus? Derek's voice, low, from the perimeter. Car on the street, slowing down. Marcus didn't look up from the vessel. How slow? Stopped. Lights off. 2 blocks east. Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. My hands were still on the ground. The dispersal was still moving. I couldn't stop now. Pulling back mid-push with entity material would be like yanking a needle out during a transfusion. Everything that hadn't been absorbed would snap back into the air, uncontained, looking for a home. Keep going, I said through clenched teeth, my fingers curling into the frozen earth. Sam? Derek started, his voice tight with warning, but I cut him off. Keep going. I pressed my palms harder into the frozen dirt, willing the earth to take the rest. Derek went quiet. I heard the soft click of his binoculars adjusting. 3/4. The pull from the ground was stronger now. Old soil, a century of accumulated weight already in it, and here was more. It took what I gave it. Slowly. Completely. My phone buzzed again, insistent in my pocket. I ignored it again. The last of the entity material slipped through my fingers and into the earth. Gone. Dispersed across 3 acres of consecrated ground, mixed into the deep ledger layer with 100,000 other costs that had been settling there since 1887. I pulled my hands up. They were shaking. Dirt under my nails, frost on my knuckles. Marcus closed the silver vessel. Empty now. Just a box. It's done, he said. Quiet, almost reverent. The ground took all of it. I sat back on my heels, breathed. The cemetery was exactly the same. Nothing had changed on the surface. Same stones, same thin grass, same February cold. But underneath, if you knew what to feel for, the ground was slightly heavier than it had been 10 minutes ago. Derek, I said, turning toward the perimeter. The car? Gone. Pulled away 2 minutes ago. Didn't get a plate. His voice carried the tension of a man who didn't like loose ends. That should have been the end of it. Job done. Vessel empty. Entity material dispersed into ground that could hold it for another century. We should have packed up, walked out, driven home. But Eddie hadn't moved. He was still standing in the older section, 50 yards uphill. He was standing in the older section, 50 yards uphill, completely still. Looking at something between the stones that I couldn't see. His form locked in place like the granite around him. Chapter 4. The Visitor. Eddie. I called his name across the frozen ground, but nothing came back. Nothing. He didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge me. His form was steady, completely still in a way that Eddie was never still. Eddie shifted, drifted, made small, unnecessary movements because 7 years of being dead hadn't broken the habit of pretending to be alive. Right now, he was a statue, fixed in place like the headstones around him. Eddie, I said again, louder this time, already walking toward him. Marcus had stopped packing the vessel. He was watching Eddie, carefully, without sudden movement, cataloging details. I walked toward the older section. The ground rose slightly underfoot. The headstones here were different, smaller, rougher, hand-carved rather than machine-cut. Dates I could barely read in the dark. 1890s, 1880s, some even older, the numbers worn to suggestions. The ledger density shifted as I climbed. The saturation I'd felt at the gate was ambient, background, like humidity. Up here it was thicker, layered, old weight on top of old weight, compressed by time into something that didn't feel like individual costs anymore. It felt like geology. Eddie was standing beside a headstone so old the name was gone. Just a rectangle of weathered granite, leaning 10 degrees off vertical, the inscription reduced to shadows. "We have company," he said. His voice was flat. Not dry, not wry. Flat. What kind? I stopped a few feet short, reading his posture for anything useful. The kind that's been dead longer than me. He still wasn't looking at me, which, given the competition, is saying something. I stopped 5 feet from him, looked where he was looking. Saw nothing. Frost on stone. Dead grass. The dark shapes of other graves stretching into the back of the cemetery. Where? I asked, scanning the space around the headstone, even though I knew I wouldn't find anything. Beside the stone, about 2 feet to your left. He paused. You can't see it. I know. It's not in your space. It's in mine. The gray space. Whatever Eddie saw, it existed in the tear. The wound I'd made in the ledger 7 years ago at the river. The place where costs went when they passed through me and didn't come out the other side. Eddie's home for 7 years. My blind spot. How long has it been there? I asked, keeping my voice low against the wind. Eddie was quiet for a moment, thinking. Actually thinking, not performing thought. Since the river, he said. Since you told me what happened. Since the gray space made that sound. He turned to face me, unsettled. I'd never seen that on Eddie before. I've been feeling something in there for days, movement that isn't mine. I figured it was aftershock from the frequency, vibration settling. But it's not settling, Sam. It's been getting clearer. Clearer how? I watched his face for any sign he was holding back. It has edges now, shape. It's not a person, and it's not a cost. Something else entirely, something that's been here. He gestured at the cemetery, the old stones, the ground. Something that's been in this ground a lot longer than any of these people. Marcus had followed me up the hill. He stood a few feet back, the empty vessel still under his arm, his face doing something I didn't like. Marcus had three expressions: amused, professional, and the one he wore when something fell outside his experience. He was wearing the third one now. Edward, he said carefully, what you're describing, can you tell how old it is? Eddie almost laughed. Old. Older than the cemetery. The graves around it are recent by comparison, and some of them are from the 1880s. He looked at the nameless headstone beside him. It's not attached to a grave. It's not attached to anything. It's just here, in the gray space, in the ground, both at once. Is it aware of you? Marcus asked, his grip tightening on the vessel. It's aware of Sam. Eddie looked at me. Oriented toward you. Has been since I first noticed it. It's not reaching, not threatening, just pointed in your direction, like a compass needle. The wind picked up. February wind, sharp, carrying nothing but cold. The candles Marcus had left at the dispersal site flickered and went out. A cost that outlived its origin, Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to us. I've heard stories. Practitioners older than me, in Lagos, in New Orleans, in places where the ledger runs deep. Costs that persist after the debtor dies, after the target dies, after everyone involved is dust. They don't behave like active costs. They don't seek resolution. They just exist. Unfinished business with no one left to finish it. And it's in the gray space, I said, staring at the ground beneath the nameless stone. The gray space is where unresolved things collect. That's what it's become. Marcus looked at the nameless stone, at the ground beneath it, at the place where Eddie saw something, and I saw nothing. Edward, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Eddie waited, his form perfectly still against the dark sky behind him. Is this the only one? Marcus asked, his voice low enough that the wind nearly took it. The wind blew. The stones leaned. Eddie looked out across the older section. Dozens of graves, maybe 100, stretching into the dark where the cemetery met a chain-link fence and a dirt service road. No, he said. It's the closest, but it's not the only one. Nobody spoke for a while. We stood among stones that were older than anyone alive, on ground that had been accepting the weight of the dead for over a century, and the dead, or what they'd left behind, were more present than any of us had understood. Derek's voice from downhill. Controlled. Professional. Sam. The car's back. Same one. Different position. It's sitting on the cross street now with a clear line of sight to the gate. Chapter 5. Exposure. Derek materialized beside us with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent years moving through places he wasn't supposed to be. Dark sedan. No plates visible from this angle. Driver and passenger. Engine running. Lights off. Facts. No interpretation. But his hand was near his jacket, near the inside pocket where he kept things I'd never asked about. How long? I said, already moving toward the downhill path. Came back 90 seconds ago. They're not hiding. They're sitting there. Whoever it is wants us to know they're there. Or they didn't care if we knew, and that possibility was worse than the alternative. Marcus started down the hill. We need to leave. The dispersal is complete. There's nothing here that requires us to stay. There's something here that definitely requires us to come back, Eddie said, but he was already drifting toward the gate, pulled along by the tether between us. Automatic, unavoidable. I looked back at the older section once. The nameless stone. The ground beneath it holding things that didn't have names anymore. Things Eddie could see, and I couldn't. Then I walked downhill, the frost crunching under my boots with every step. We moved through the cemetery in a loose group. Derek first, 20 yards ahead, binoculars up. Marcus beside me, vessel under his arm, moving faster than a 70-year-old man should be able to move. Eddie drifting alongside. The visitor, I said to Eddie, low. It followed you here? Or it was already here and you found it? Both. It's been in the gray space since the river trip. A shape I couldn't identify. Out here, on this ground, it's closer to the surface. Like the cemetery thins whatever wall there is between where I am and where you are. He paused. I can feel others further back. Fainter. Older. This one is just the nearest. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I kept my voice low, though Derek was too far ahead to hear. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Sam. Something might be following me in the afterlife, but I can't tell because everything in here looks the same. He gave me a look. I waited until I had something worth saying. Fair enough. I couldn't argue with that, so I didn't try. At the gate, Derek stopped, held up a hand. We stopped behind him. The sedan moved, he said. It's on the main road now, heading north. But there's a second vehicle. SUV. Black. Parked on the south side of the block. Wasn't there when we arrived. 2 vehicles, coordinated. Someone had dispatched a second unit while we were in the cemetery. That's not random surveillance, Derek said. He lowered the binoculars. His face was calm, but his eyes were doing math I could almost follow. That's a box. 1 north, 1 south. They're bracketing the exit. Bureau? I said, glancing at the sedan's position down the block. Bureau doesn't use civilian vehicles for surveillance. They use fleet cars with government plates, and they don't care if you see them. He shook his head. This is private, contracted. Someone hired people who know what they're doing. Marcus's hand tightened on the vessel. Empty as it was, the silver box was evidence. Proof of what we'd been carrying and where we disposed of it. My phone buzzed. I'd ignored it twice during the dispersal. I pulled it out now. 2 missed calls from Miriam. A text from 20 minutes ago. Call me. Now. Not the group chat. Me directly. 4 sentences, no punctuation shortcuts, no emojis. And a second text, 3 minutes old, sitting right below the first. Rhodes went to the director today. There's a flag on my credentials. They're auditing my access history. I stared at the screen. Read both messages again. The words didn't change. Miriam Tate had been our inside line for months. Every piece of Bureau intelligence, every heads up about Rhodes, every warning that let us stay a step ahead, all of it flowed through Miriam. Without her access, we were blind. I called her. She picked up before the first ring finished. Tell me, I said, pressing the phone hard against my ear. Rhodes requested a full audit of my case file access for the past 6 months. The director approved it this afternoon. Her voice was controlled, tight. Miriam under pressure sounded exactly like Miriam not under pressure, except for a slight flatness that replaced the usual measured warmth. I've accessed files through standard channels, used legitimate case numbers as cover, never pulled anything that couldn't be justified by my current caseload. But 6 months of access logs under a microscope, they'll find patterns, I said. The line went quiet for a beat too long. They'll find that I've been looking at files connected to Rhodes's network. Files that an auditor with my portfolio has no reason to touch. She paused. I have 72 hours before the audit results come back. Maybe less. Derek was listening. His expression hadn't changed, but his stance had. Weight shifted forward, the posture of someone recalculating variables. Can you scrub the logs? I asked, pacing the sidewalk outside the gate. No. IT security handles the audit independently. I can't access my own access records. Another pause. Longer. Sam, if they confirm what I think they'll confirm, it's not a reprimand. It's an investigation. Criminal referral. Unauthorized access to classified placement records. The cemetery sat behind us. The sedan and the SUV sat in front of us. Miriam's career, and possibly her freedom, sat on a 72-hour timer. Sit tight, I said. Don't pull any more files. Don't access anything you don't need for your regular work. We'll figure this out. Figure it out fast, she said, and the line went dead. I looked at Derek. He was already watching the road, arms folded across his chest. We go out together, he said. My truck. I know the north end. There are streets they can't follow a full-size vehicle through without us seeing them. He paused. Leave your car. Pick it up tomorrow in daylight. They'll know the plate, I said, glancing back toward where I'd parked. They already know the plate, Sam. They know all our plates. The question is whether they know what we just did in that cemetery. Marcus got in the back of Derek's truck without argument, the silver vessel on his lap. Eddie beside him, though Eddie didn't technically take up space. I got in the passenger seat. Derek started the engine, pulled away from the gate slowly, deliberately, letting whoever was watching see that we weren't running. The sedan's headlights came on 2 blocks behind us. Derek turned left. The sedan turned left, keeping the same 2-block distance between us. Derek turned right onto a narrow residential street. Parked cars on both sides, barely enough room for the truck. The sedan followed. Closer now. Hold on, Derek said, and cut through an alley I hadn't seen. No lights. Dumpsters on both sides. The truck scraped something metal, and Derek didn't flinch. The alley dumped us onto a parallel street heading east. The sedan didn't follow. It couldn't. Too wide for the gap. Derek drove 3 more blocks, took 2 more turns, and pulled onto the highway on-ramp heading south. The rear-view mirror showed empty road. The SUV? I asked, checking the side mirror on instinct. Never moved from its position. Probably a spotter, not a pursuit vehicle. Derek checked the mirror again. His hands were steady on the wheel. Whoever sent them, they weren't trying to stop us. They were documenting, logging who was there, what we carried, how long we stayed. Leland? I said, and it wasn't a question. It was the only answer that fit. Derek didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. We both knew. Chapter 6. Wait. Derek dropped Marcus at second chances first. Marcus got out with the empty vessel, paused at the door of the truck, and looked at me through the window. The ground held, he said. Whatever else happened tonight, the dispersal worked. The entity material is gone. That's one less thing hunting you. Just the one, Eddie said from the back seat. Marcus heard him. Most people couldn't, but Marcus had always been able to. Just the one, Marcus agreed. He tapped the roof of the truck twice and went inside. The lights and second chances came on behind him, one by one, deliberate, in order. Derek drove me to my building. Parked, but didn't kill the engine. The surveillance team was professional, he said, staring straight ahead. Good vehicles, good positioning, 2-unit bracket on a target they knew would be stationary. That's not bureau playbook. That's private security. Expensive. The kind you hire when you have resources and you don't want official channels involved. Leland has resources, I said, staring at the dark front of my building. Leland has everything. Derek's jaw worked. When I was at the bureau, we had a name for the kind of surveillance that lets you see it. We called it a courtesy notice. It means they're not trying to catch you doing something. They already know what you're doing. They're telling you they know. That sat between us for a moment. Neither of us moved to fill it. Miriam, I said, turning to face him. 72 hours. I heard. Derek reached into the center console and pulled out a burner phone. New. Still in the packaging. Give her this tomorrow. She needs a clean line that isn't connected to any of her existing devices. And tell her to start copying everything she can justify copying. Before the audit locks her out. I took the phone. Plastic packaging cold in my hand. Derek, I said, my hand on the door handle, but not pulling it. Yeah, he said, his hand still resting on the steering wheel. The car in the cemetery. You said it came, left, then came back in a different position. That means they repositioned while we were doing the dispersal. They saw us go in, and they adjusted to get a better angle on the gate. Yes, he said, and then looked back at the road ahead of us. Which means someone told them we'd be there before we arrived. Derek looked at me. The kind of look that said he'd already thought of this and was waiting for me to catch up. Get some sleep, Sam. I'll run the vehicles tomorrow. If they're registered to anything traceable, I'll find it. I got out. The truck pulled away. I watched it turn the corner and disappear. Upstairs. Apartment dark. The strip of hardwood between the kitchen and the living room where I'd woken up on the floor after the crystal absorption. That felt like a year ago. It had been days. Eddie materialized by the window, looking out at the street. checking for anything that shouldn't be there. The visitor, I said, in the gray space. You said it's been there since the river, since the frequency. Since around then, it's hard to pin down time in there. And it's oriented toward me, I said, standing at the kitchen counter with dirty hands, like a compass needle. He turned from the window. Sam, the gray space has always been empty. Just me and whatever costs filter through. For 7 years, nothing else. And now there's something in there that's older than the cemetery, and it's not alone. He paused. That's not a coincidence. Something changed. Either the space is opening up, or something out there just noticed that the door exists. You held something back, in front of Marcus. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited. Eddie didn't deny it. When you were doing the dispersal, pushing entity material into the ground, the visitor moved. For the first time since I've been aware of it, the thing moved. Toward you. Toward what you were doing. Aim at my eyes. It was feeding, Sam. Whatever you pushed into that soil, it woke something up. The radiator clanked. Old pipes, old building, the same sounds I'd been hearing for years. The apartment was cold. My hands were still dirty from the cemetery, soil under my nails. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, watched the dark water circle the drain. The dispersal had worked. One problem solved. But Eddie had a visitor he couldn't explain. Marcus had a theory with no precedent. Miriam had 72 hours before her cover collapsed, and someone had known we'd be at Elmwood before we got there. One less thing hunting me. A dozen more lining up behind it. I left the kitchen light on, sat down on the couch, didn't sleep. The radio on the shelf, the one I always left on, volume low, tuned to nothing, crackled once. A single pulse of static, sharp and short. Then silence. Then, barely audible, under the silence, the frequency from the drive back from Harrowfield. The gray space, resonating, louder than before. Eddie heard it too. His form flickered once, responding. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say that would make it smaller. I sat in the dark and listened to something old wake up.